Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest stories in MMA. I'm your host, Gorgeous George, and with me, as always, some of the sharpest MMA minds in the biz. Joining me this week, a titan in MMA media, Mike Bond. He's in Toronto, fresh off of covering UFC 281 in New York. Fada Hanoun, a rising star in MMA media. People love Fada. He hosted the UFC 281 preview show for us. Great job, Fada. And of course, Goes from MMA Junkie Radio here in Las Vegas. He co-hosted the UFC 281 watch along with me. Cold Coffee, another beast, just got back from New York. He'll be handling the ones and twos, and we're going to get started here. All right, this past Saturday, of course, Alex Pereira defeated Israel Adesanya to become the UFC middleweight champion. Pereira was down in the fight 3 rounds to 1, according to the official scorecards. Yet that didn't stop him from digging deep and stopping the last style bender in round 5 via TKO. At the post-fight press conference, however, the topic of the immediate rematch came up plenty of times. Sounds like everyone is in. Are you? I'm talking to the fans here. Of course, I'm going to talk to the panel, but I want to know, who do you think should be the favorite here? I looked for odds. I still haven't found any as of a few minutes before this live SBC. So maybe you guys can even play odds maker for me. Now, it might sound like a silly question because Pereira's 3-0 against Israel Adesanya, but may I stress again, Israel Adesanya was carrying a 3-1 lead going into round 5. All right, Mike, you're going to get us started this week. Go.
Yeah, this is obviously an extremely interesting fight as it played out. It was, awesome. I think it lived up to the hype up until that point. But, Alex Pereira, I think we all knew that he's got the power to really change the game here. Israel had to be the more technical guy out there and kind of pick his shots, and he couldn't make a single mistake in this fight, and he really didn't in the lead up to the 5th round. But in that 5th round, Alex Pereira knew, his team knew that he had to go for it. He had to leave everything out there because this was a huge moment for him. I mean, if he had lost this fight, his climb back to a title shot was going to be really difficult. Does he get past the Whitakers, the Vittoris, these guys that are much more difficult stylistic matchups for him? So he came out there and he did his thing. And I think, going into a potential rematch in another fight here, this would be a similar analysis of it, right? Like, I think Izzy has to be nearly flawless to go in there, and I think he can be in a lot of ways. He just needs to not make many mistakes. So I would not be surprised if he was the favorite again going into a fight, just looking how the way it played out. But I think the odds will be much, much closer. I mean, I think he was around like a minus 230, something like that going into fight time. I would imagine it would be in the 100 range, maybe even like closer to a pick'em or something like that if they do it again. But I would not be surprised at all to see Izzy being the favorite another time going into this fight, despite the fact that he is 0-3.
Yeah, I mean, you said it perfectly, exactly how I'm feeling, man. 3-0 or whatever. He has competed in every single one of those fights, even in the last 2 that he got clipped. How about you, Fada?
I think Pick'em is right about correct, just for the simple reason that because Alex Pereira carries so much power, it's almost like he's got 25 minutes to find that chin. That's the way I look at it. And he did. And it was kind of last second, 3 minutes left in the fight. But Izzy did really fight almost a perfect fight. He really did. There were some scrambles on the ground. And I thought that was going to zap Pereira's energy. That's kind of one of the things I was talking about in the preview show, how mixing in the grappling was going to be good for Izzy, not necessarily because I saw it as a chink in Pereira's armor, which I think we did see a lot of holes, but I think because Izzy's not really a grappler, but I think it was the idea of really zapping that energy out of him, the cardio, so he could carry less power into the latter rounds, the championship rounds, and that was a big question for me. So I was very impressed with the fact that the way he kind of turned things around. His corner work obviously did a great job of amping him up, and then he managed to find that chin in round 5 and still showed us that he still packs that power even super late into the fight. So I think that was the most thing I was impressed by. And the fact that he has 25 minutes to find that chin, I think maybe a pick him. And I also wouldn't be surprised if he was a slight favorite. But again, I also wouldn't be surprised if Adesanya was favorite because he was winning that fight and he was fighting very well.
Yeah, and Adesanya was getting done well on the ground too. He showed a little bit of that. Man, it's so many things to factor in here. But let me get one thought here before you get to you goes. Michael Joel says, Izzy is my boy, but I don't see him beating Alex in the rematch. Man, I disagree. Could easily happen. It might not happen, of course, but I think it could easily happen. Again, 3-1. Hello. I mean, it was right there for the taking for him. Goes?
Yeah, and I think if you're a fan of Izzy, I think you're going to be okay going in this one. It is crazy, right? Because he is 3-0 over him. Yeah, we get that, the scorecards and all that, but we don't just kind of pick up a book and read the ending, right? We have to read the body of work. It tells the story. And in that story was a tactical, but also somewhat dominating Israel Adesanya. He did all the things he said he was going to do. He was exciting for the fans. He nearly ended the fight at the end of round one or two more seconds and that we're not even talking about any of this. So we can't really ignore all those things. There is an edge for Alex Pereira. It's a mental edge. It's a slight edge, but he's got it. You got to. You still have to factor in what happened in kickboxing because it lives up here in Israel Adesanya's head. And now when you add in this extra MMA fight, of course, it's got to kill him. But at the end of the day, they're going to go back, they're going to watch the footage, and he's going to understand that he had that fight. It was right there. And I just don't see in a rematch how we can ignore all that stuff. So when you're talking about odds, you have to get rid of the other fights. Just look at it as MMA. He's 1-0 in MMA. That's what we're factoring into this MMA fight. Okay. So I would have it somewhere opening about minus 150 Adesanya, but I bet you by the time it's fight time, I bet you that thing climbs up to about 200.
Yeah, it all's going to depend on how you believe. I mean, look at here. We got a gentleman here, Rahul Kumar, saying Izzy was boring. Glad he got slept. See, I would disagree there. I did not think that fight was boring, man. If he had gone to a decision, I would have said great fight. I was very, very entertained, and I think he's off there. He didn't get slept. I mean, I guess he got stopped, and I guess I want to know from you guys, did you even think it was an early stoppage? Let's go right back around the horn. Mike, what did you think? Were you okay with the stoppage?
I was, especially being there cage side in the moment. I mean, I haven't had the chance to actually rewatch it from the broadcast angle. I've seen like some Twitter clips and stuff like that, but being there, I thought it was okay. Like Izzy was on our side of the octagon, more or less where press row was, and he was definitely dazed. Like he was moving around. You could see like it was one of those situations where very close, like one or two more shots. Alex was coming in for the kill there, and he would have been out cold. And I get him wanting to say like, "Let me go out on my shield." He jokes around, bring back Steve Mazzagatti, things like that. I can get that. This is the highest level of the sport. The stakes do not get bigger. This is a guy who is an undefeated champion in this weight class, never lost as a middleweight going in. You want to make this absolutely definitive, right? But then that changes a lot of things too, right? Like we're talking about a rematch. If Izzy gets put out cold, a really bad one, who knows how long it might take him to recover from that. So in a way to allow, protect the fighter, give him some future, leg room to get back in there and fight, he was done a favor by the referee because even if I don't think he was coming back and winning in that moment. Maybe he survived to the end of the round, then we get him winning, 3-2 on the scorecards, unless we get a 10-8 in that round, then it turns into a draw, which would have been a whole other layer of craziness. But right here, right now, I am okay with the stoppage, but I understand the sentiment from Adesanya, how he wants to be put completely out because this is, the highest level and such a big moment, so many stakes for him. And you just don't want to have any stuff left in your mind to let it linger.
Fada, what did you think of the stoppage? Could you have handled a few more seconds or blows to the head, however it is that your threshold is?
I thought it was slightly early, and I do agree in terms of the rule set. You have to be intelligently defending yourself, so I'm not like super mad about it. But when you look at the fact that he was up 3-1, and the fact that you never know, we've seen crazier things in fights, so I guess we would have never known, right? That's the whole point. Why I wouldn't disagree if he just let it go slightly, just a little bit. We never know what could have happened if Adesanya would have dove in for a single leg, if they would have grappled a little bit more, if Pereira would have gotten a little bit tired and then he would have survived, or maybe it was going to be put out cold. We don't know. And of course, as Mike alluded to, if he was put out cold, that would have delayed kind of like rematch hopes, and we don't know what a knockout like that could do to a fighter's career. But that's the whole point. We wouldn't have known. So maybe I thought it was slightly early. Maybe let it go just a few seconds more.
Yeah, and goes like I told you, I thought Pereira was more hurt at the end of round one, and Chandler was more hurt at the end of round one than Izzy when that fight was stopped. He was still kind of moving, and then he reacted quickly to the ref, like, "What are you doing?" So his faculties were there. Wobbled, yes. Hurt, yes. Rocked, yes. All of that, but I still thought that he deserved a little bit more. How about you guys?
Well, we hear fighters argue about this all the time. Like some of them say every fight should be treated equally, and others say championship fights should maybe go a little bit longer. I've seen referees kind of handle that differently themselves, but in this particular case, I think what was awaiting Israel Adesanya would have been horrific. I mean, he was looking straight down, he could barely stand, and Alex Pereira could hit you with just about anything that he wants. So I think he kind of saved him from probably being out for a good while. I'm good with it. I do understand when people say maybe it could have gone a little bit more, and who knows, maybe he could have found a way to get out of it because fighters have. But in this particular case, I think the right call was made.
Yeah, one thing we can all agree, it was one hell of a fight. So yeah, Kumar is off on this one. It was not boring. Go tell that fairy tale to Harold.
And if you go back to, the point about him being potentially knocked out cold, if you listen to what Eugene Behrman told Ariel Helwani in their interview last week before the fight, talking about the kickboxing fight, when he was knocked out cold, he said he made him take a year off from fighting. Like, he was even lying to Izzy, saying there was no fights available for him just because he wanted to give him that long time to recover. I imagine if that happened again, he would have taken a similar approach. Adesanya has fought, 3 times in the last 10 months. He's been the most active champion in the UFC. So maybe even with this, he still takes a pretty good time off. He said at the post-fight press conference that he's maybe dealing with some health stuff or personal stuff. So there's something going on there. And I think if he had been put out very, very badly, it would have just been a long delay for him. We might not see him for a year. We might not see him for a while anyways, but I think if that had happened, it would certainly be a very long layoff. And then we're talking about having to go a whole different direction with the middleweight division.
Wow. Well, that might be good news for the winner of Costa and Whitaker, but we'll see how Izzy recovers.
Then you put the rematch in jeopardy, right? It's one of those kind of Holly Holm, Ronda Rousey situations. Do you wait for the rematch as long as it takes, or do you just move on with the division?
Yeah, I hear you, man. All right, let's move on to topic number 2. Zhang Weili is your new strawweight champion as she submitted Carla Esparza in the co-main event at UFC 281. Weili is now a 2-time champion in the stacked 115-pound division. True or false? This time around, she'll have more than one successful title defense. We're going to start off with Farah. Take it away.
I think it depends who she fights. If it's Rose Namajunas, I don't know how to answer that quite yet, for the simple reason I know Rose is up 2-0, and I know the second fight was super close. Some people thought maybe Zhang Weili won that fight. I felt like Rose sealed it with the 5th round takedown. But anyways, I just feel that Rose stylistically is probably the best matchup for her. Maybe the worst matchup, I should say, for Zhang Weili. But again, Rose is coming off of that lackluster loss to Carla Esparza. We don't know mentally how she's going to rebound from that. And I don't know if that's a direction that the UFC are going to go, considering her performance against Carla. But I wouldn't be surprised if that's what Zhang Weili would want, because Rose is up 2-0 on her. But anyone else in the division, I think I'd favor Zhang Weili. She's well-rounded. She's got power in her hands. She's super strong. And that's the thing that I was thinking in this fight with Carla Esparza. I said wrestling technique, yeah, I would give the advantage to Esparza. I think she's probably the best grappler in the division, other than Tatiana Suarez. We don't know if she comes back at flyweight. But my point being that she's one of the best grapplers in the division. But I just felt like Zhang Weili was going to be too strong for her. That's what I felt like. She ended up submitting her as well. So Zhang Weili's strong. She's got good hands. She's well-rounded, and she's only getting better. She's really kind of rounded her game off very well. But I just think Rose specifically is probably the worst matchup for her in the division. So if it's Rose next, I don't know. But if she fights anybody else, I'd probably favor her.
Good stuff, Farah. James McKenna in the chat, he shares the same sentiment. He says, Rose beats Zhang every time. I don't know if it's a whole 10 out of 10 because, like you stated, second fight was close. But all right, Goes, how about you? What do you think here?
Well, I think the thing about Zhang Weili is she's great now, but she continues to improve, right? And that's the scary part. We don't know when that Rose fight would happen, if they would book it, if it's going to be anytime soon. Yeah, we know that that's kind of her kryptonite. But the thing is, Zhang Weili is getting better with every fight. So would the outcome be the same? I mean, these were close fights before. During our watch along, George, we had O'Day Osborne and Chris Curtis in studio. They were saying the scariest thing they've ever heard at the PI was Zhang Weili hitting that bag. They said it sounded like machine gun fire. They actually covered their heads. So, I mean, what Zhang Weili is doing is pretty extraordinary. And like Farah said, the strength that she has, the abilities that she's putting everything together right now. I don't know, guys. I feel like there are some fighters out there that can maybe give her somewhat of a fight, but I don't know that they're as well-rounded as she is. So I think she's going to reign. I think she's going to reign for a while.
All right. Michael Joel in the chat says Zhang will beat Rose hands down. Zhang will keep this belt for some time. Maybe, possibly. You never know. How about you, Mike Bond? Share your thoughts.
I tend to agree with both Goes and Fire here. The only thing that gives me pause is just the amount of turnover we've seen in this division, right? Like, it's just being a hot potato with this belt in recent years. So, like, who knows, right? Maybe it just continues to happen. But I do know that this time feels different than the first time Zhang Weili won the title. I mean, her first title shot, it seemed very circumstantial. Yes, she had some good wins in the UFC, but like, she got the title shot. Jessica Andrade had just beat Rose. They made her do like a 2-month turnaround from when she won the belt. They're doing an event in China. They give Zhang Weili the title shot there. It just seemed like it was, as I said, very circumstantial. This time, her title shot felt very appropriate coming off the knockout over Joanna Jędrzejczyk. She goes in there. She just seems so much more prepared for it, so much more ready for the moment. And we've seen a lot more of her. We've seen her deal with the adversity, the ups and downs, the losses, kind of a lot more of a story that we like seeing out of these fighters that rise to the top of the sport. And we got it all from her. And now she just feels, physically ready, mentally ready to take advantage of this title reign. So I could see her holding the belt. I still think Rose is probably the trickiest matchup for her. I'm not keen on seeing that fight right away, though. I want someone, as we kind of talked about, last week in my matchmaker column, I want some fresh blood in that title picture. And I think that's Amanda Lemos here. I think she's done the work. I think she's a good fit. You get her in there, you get a fresh contender. And then, if Rose comes back, gets a win against, a Mackenzie Dern, a Marina Rodriguez, someone like that, Yan Jiaonan, then you put the winner of that into a title shot and we go from there. I do think it is interesting. Zhang has the belt now. Rose has beaten her twice. There's a fun little storyline here. You can justify it. But for me right now, I want to see some fresh blood in there. I want to see Zhang potentially get a title defense and try to start building some momentum here. And honestly, we can sit here and say truthfully, the UFC wants her as a long dominant champion. That market in China is beyond important to them. There's so much potential to make money, all that. If you saw a report, I can't remember exactly who put it out on Twitter, saying that apparently, Chinese television or whatever broadcast deal they had paid the UFC something like $7 million to broadcast that fight. I think we all wish that Zhang Weili got her fair share of that. That's a whole other can of worms, but she's obviously a very important piece of the puzzle for them promotionally. So I think they want her to be at the top for as long as possible.
Yeah, let me tell you, I would love to see Lemos and Zhang Weili throw hands, for 15, 25 minutes. I think that'd be quite a show, and it definitely would be some fresh blood. A quick comment here from Bananas and Grapes. He says, I love the awesome highlights that accompany our takes here on Spinning Back Clique. That's a shout out to Kamikaze and Cold Coffee. He's the one that's on the ones and twos right now. We're going to move on to topic number 3. The Islam Makhachev versus Alex Volkanovski matchup is official for UFC 284 on February 11th in Perth, Australia. And on the same night, the UFC booked Josh Emmett versus Yair Rodriguez for the UFC interim featherweight title. Did the UFC handle these bookings correctly? Do you like the way all this played out across both divisions? Share your thoughts. Goes, the floor is yours.
Man, you guys know I'm not a big fan of that title fight, so I won't harp too much on it. But is Rodriguez versus Emmett a great fight? Yes, of course it is. Anything that involves Yair Rodriguez is going to be exciting. I do agree that will be a fun fight. Props to the UFC for making it an interim and not holding up the division. I love that part. Is it the fight that should happen? I'm not so sure, guys. Arnold Allen has won 12 straight, 10 of those in the UFC. That's pretty damn impressive to put a streak like that together. So I ask, what has Yair Rodriguez done for me to overlook that, right? So you would think, okay, is the fight in Mexico? Maybe that would make sense, right? The big stage, a Mexican fighter. No, it's not. So you get one of these right there, right? Then you compare the streaks, right? Does he have a better streak than Arnold Allen, or even one that's kind of like comparable? No, it's not even close. So you get one of these. That just doesn't make sense to me, guys. I understand that you want to put together exciting fights. At the end of the day, we're going to be happy. But if you're asking me if it's the right fight, I don't think it is, man. And if I'm Arnold Allen, given some of the injury history in the past, I stay ready for this fight because there's a good chance that come fight night, you might actually see Arnold Allen in there.
Man, I love those guys from Cage Warriors. We used to broadcast Cage Warriors a long time ago on MMA Junkie. I've seen that guy perform there. 10-0 in the UFC, and somehow he got left out. I couldn't believe it. Mike Bond, how about you, man?
I am a little surprised. The only thing that makes me think they kept Arnold Allen out of this is because it sounds like in March they want to do this huge event in England, maybe a stadium show, and they're going to need to load the deck on that thing as deep as possible. And Arnold Allen would be critical to have on that card under Leon Edwards versus Kamaru Usman 3. You could have just done the interim title fight maybe on that card instead. I think that would have been logical. Feels a little weird to do an interim title fight on the card where the guy who you're doing the interim title for is still fighting on. Like, the whole thing is kind of bizarre in that regard, with Volkanovski still competing on the same event. But yeah, I mean, I understand why they did it. Yair Rodriguez, for better or worse, is a bigger name than Arnold Allen right now in the sport. He's got, the crazy knockout highlights, the flashy style, things like that. So I get why they went this direction. And I would have felt bad for Josh Emmett being left out of it too. The thing is, no matter how they booked this thing, someone was getting left out of this. One of these three, right? So we would have been sitting here if they went the other way saying, hey, Yair Rodriguez is the highest ranked guy. He got left out. Josh Emmett's on a nice winning streak too with all these knockouts and knockdowns. He got left out. So they couldn't do this perfectly regardless. I'm not going to get too up in arms about it. Seems like Arnold Allen isn't that bothered by it either. So why am I going to sit here and cry about it for him if he's not going to for himself?
All right. 2 divisions to cover. Fada, what did you think of how everything played out? I mean, they got themselves a nice card going for UFC 284 in Perth.
Yeah, I think it was kind of intentional that they wanted the I kind of call it like a glorified number one contender is kind of what this interim title is, because Volkanovski's been pretty active, so I don't think it necessarily warrants that. But the idea that he's going after the lightweight title, you don't know if they're going to be able to defend both belts. Amanda Nunes has been doing a good job, but at the end of the day, is there really a featherweight division? That's why it's been a little bit easier for her, because it's not like there are featherweight contenders cramming to fight her. But I think it's just kind of like the UFC trying to set it up timeline-wise. When Volkanovski fights, we get the next number one contender, because Arnold Allen said it himself. It was like a weird picture. Like, yeah, you're getting that win by TKO due to injury against Ortega, and then Arnold Allen getting that win over Calvin Kattar, TKO due to injury, and then Josh Emmett beating Calvin Kattar in a close, controversial decision. So at the end of the day, based off of their last wins, nobody's like screaming number one contender. I think that's why. But again, like Mike said, someone was going to get left out anyway, right? If they ended up matching up Arnold Allen and Yair, Josh Emmett was probably not going to be happy. Yair was calling out Volkanovski directly. He wasn't going to be happy. So I think, and we don't know, maybe Arnold Allen wasn't ready to turn around in February. Maybe they did consider him and maybe he wasn't ready to turn around. We don't know. I know he's had some injury issues with his hand and stuff like that. Maybe they're saving him for London. We don't know. So I don't hate it, because at the end of the day, I think they're just trying to find a clear-cut number one contender for Volkanovski in hopes that if he beats Islam, his next fight is a title defense. If he loses to Islam, his next fight is a title defense. And then timeline-wise, it just lines up.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad quick decisions were made, and now we can just look forward to it. Quick shout out here. Kimo Niemi says, Emmett is an animal, 100. Sounds like he's a big fan. However, Darby Crash in the chat says, CKB is going to lose another champ. Wow. Piling on. All right. Let's move on here to topic 4. Dustin Poirier defeated Michael Chandler in the feature bout at UFC 281 in what was one hell of a fight. We all knew this was going to be a slobber knocker. And guess what? There was slobber, and they definitely knocked each other around pretty good. Both guys were slated for big fights going forward, win or lose. They're stars, right? So now that they delivered this classic, what big fights await them? What is next for each guy? And to be fair, we got one of the people that does the matchmaker pieces on MMA Junkie here to start things off. Mike, it's back on you.
Yeah, there's some, good options for both these guys, right? Like, obviously, 2 of the great action fighters in the UFC right now. I think maybe the clear path forward out of the 2 is for Dustin Poirier. And to me, that's pretty clearly a fight with Beneil Dariush, which he was asked about at the post-fight press conference and said that he thinks it makes a lot of sense. It does. You feel bad for Dariush being like, hey, the guy deserves a title shot, and he does. If this this fight with Volkanovski wasn't happening in Makhachev, he would absolutely be the guy who should be there. And maybe you could say, hey, the fight's only in February. Why not just sit out? But it's going to be a long break, because after that fight, let's say Islam Makhachev wins, as a lot of people maybe are expecting him to. He then goes into Ramadan. He's probably not fighting till September, October. Then you're talking about Beneil Dariush being out a year at that point, after he had just been out for a very long time before this most recent fight with Mateus Gamrot. So to me, when you just look at the lightweight picture, Poirier versus Dariush, a ton of sense. That is a clear title eliminator. Dustin back in the mix now because obviously he had lost to Charles Oliveira when he was the champ, but he hasn't fought Islam Makhachev. He hasn't fought Alexander Volkanovski. So if he wins, he's right back there. I'm sure people are asking, what about Charles Oliveira? We thought Charles Oliveira was going to be fighting, in Brazil in January. He's saying that he probably wants some time off, rightfully so, given what he's done. So we don't really know where he goes in there. But Poirier seemingly came out of this fight, as unscathed as he could be. Probably wants to fight in like the first quarter or so next year after being off 11 months. This one just makes a lot of sense. I don't know if it'll land on that same card as UFC 284 because it is pretty soon for Poirier, but I could see it sometime happening, not long after that. And as far as Chandler, a little trickier for him, but I think you could probably do that Conor McGregor fight if you really want. I would not be surprised to see Chandler take some time off after all these kind of consecutive wars he's had. That gives Conor McGregor the time to get back in the USADA pool if he actually does it. 6 months to get ready for that. Maybe happens International Fight Week in July. That seems pretty perfect to me. I think if you look at the lay of the land, not really any layup fights for Conor McGregor right now. I don't know how many he'd be favored to win in, all that stuff, but I think Michael Chandler is a winnable fight for him. He is hittable. I think he's a guy who can get rocked. Conor could hurt him with that power in that left hand. So if you're kind of looking at the options there, I think maybe those are the two that make sense.
Yeah, and if McGregor doesn't want to get in the USADA pool, maybe Chandler can move up to 205 and fight him there. But how about you, Fada? What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I agree with Mike with Poirier and Dariush. Dariush was saying it multiple times, like, I love fighting. Like, I just want to fight. So I think the idea of him waiting, I don't think is going to sit well with him. And like Mike said, Islam has Ramadan coming up, so he's going to be out for a while after that. So I like that fight because also if Dariush is not going to get a title shot, having a name like Poirier on your resume or just fighting a guy like Poirier, he deserves that. It comes with a lot of attention. It's going to land on a big card, whether pay-per-view or a fight night main event. It's going to have – because him fighting Mateus Gamrot, and Gamrot is an amazing fighter, but it felt a bit like a step down because he was calling for a title shot then, and it was a risky fight as well. So I think he deserves a name like Dustin Poirier. And for Dustin Poirier – I mean, if you look at his recent run, he's been incredible. The 2 losses came to very good grapplers. So that's a good test for him as well before he gets into the title picture. If he can beat a Beneil Dariush who's got really good grappling, I think that will help his case as well in terms of getting a title shot against potentially another grappler in Islam Makhachev. As for Michael Chandler, I like the Conor fight. I think it makes a lot of sense, but I don't know how chasing a Conor fight just seems tough because you never know what Conor is going to do, right? He can kind of do whatever he wants in a way just because he holds the name and the pay-per-view buys and everything. So I don't know if he's going to – I do think he should take some time off, and it could line up well with Conor, but it almost feels like waiting for Conor McGregor could be a waste of time because who said he's going to get that, right? The only other name I could think of in lightweight that would work well for Michael Chandler is maybe Rafael Dos Anjos. He's coming off of that big win over Renato Moicano. He has a name, and I think – it's a similar situation to, I know Dos Anjos may not be the Dos Anjos of 2015 when he was lightweight champ, but we saw when they matched up Michael Chandler with Tony Ferguson, a big name. And, Michael Chandler is coming off of a loss himself, so I think RDA is another option.
All right, Ghost, I see your quarter there on the arcade game. You're next, right? I want to go back to Mike, though, for a second. Mike, clear something up for me. You were there in New York. What about the Eddie Alvarez possibility? I know it's kind of a long shot, right? But did you feel like Dana was possibly warm to it? I know he says we're focusing on youth, but he loves big fights. That's a big name fighter.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess it'll just be interesting. I think it probably falls on what Eddie Alvarez is asking for, right? Like if he's asking for, the sun, the star, and the moon from the UFC as far as pay to come back, I don't think they're going to be willing to invest it for him at this stage of his career. But if they're able to reach a deal that they like and he likes, I could see him coming back for a couple. I think it would make sense for him, if he doesn't go to, say, Bellator or wherever else. Dana said he reached out personally to him. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And Chandler seemed warm to it. So I think it just depends what you're trying to do with Michael Chandler, right? At this point, are you trying to get him wins? I think if you want to try to get him back on the rebound, that is a great option for him. I like the RDA suggestion from Farah there. I think the Conor one is potentially one that can go both ways, right? Like if Chandler beats him, it's great. You're able to invest a lot in him. I think he's got a more sturdy future in the UFC than Conor does. But if Conor wins, it's obviously, a Conor McGregor win, which is much needed, and he's back on the track. So, I don't think the Eddie Alvarez one is crazy or unrealistic. I could see it maybe happening, but it's just all going to depend on what he's asking for.
Yeah, we'll see what happens, but at least they're talking. Floyd in the chat room says Chandler is too worried about the fans and the fight of the night. I would disagree. And even he's come to terms with how reckless he was versus Gagey. I thought he used his wrestling. He won round 2. He started to use his wrestling in round 3, and he just too much momentum in that takedown. Dustin Poirier, savvy, was able to capitalize on that. So I would disagree with you, Floyd. Goes. What are your thoughts on this topic here?
I think what's next for both of them should be an ice bath, and I think Michael Chandler should dive in head first. I am with Floyd 100%. I think he makes a good point there. Look, Michael Chandler is addicted to what goes on in these fights, man. The big stage, the big fight, and the big paycheck. I think he's addicted to that, and I think the UFC is too. And that's why he's not anywhere near a title shot now, but it doesn't mean he's not going to get big fights. He's not going to get big paychecks. And really the way, Farah and Mike line that up, that Conor McGregor fight, I don't see why that does not happen. He does need time off, and it kind of works with Conor's timeline, and it is a huge fight. Those two are going to chirp at each other. It's going to be crazy in the cage. So I just think it's an addiction, man. Michael Chandler fought great in round 2, and if he fought a lot of his fights like that, like he fought in round 2, the trajectory of his career would be completely different. But he doesn't do that, okay? And hey, who's complaining, right? We all love ourselves a Michael Chandler fight. But I do see that happening, George. Dustin Poirier, yeah, man. Beneil Dariush, I think that's a slam dunk. What I want to see out of Dustin Poirier, which I thought his performance was tremendous. I thought his defense was great. I thought his patience was great. But the one thing that I do want to see, and it's unfortunate, a lot of people kind of put Islam Makhachev and Khabib Nurmagomedov in the same boat because, yeah, we get it. Stylistically, they're very similar fighters. But the one thing that I can't get out of my mind was just Dustin not really having an answer off of his back. And I think we saw that again in round 2 of the Michael Chandler fight. So in Beneil Dariush, that's where he's going to want to put him. And if he does, I'd like to see a little bit of an improvement there from Dustin Poirier, because Dustin Poirier is a great fighter, and I would like to see him fight Islam Makhachev, but I need to know that he's shored up that deficiency a little bit.
All right, good stuff. Let's move on to the next one. Bellator 288 takes place on Friday, and that card has 2 title fights. But Vadim Nemkov defends his light heavyweight title versus Corey Anderson, and the fight will also crown the Bellator light heavyweight Grand Prix winner. In the co-main event, Patricky Frady, the bigger brother of Patricio Frady, he will put up his lightweight title versus Usman Nurmagomedov. Which one of these 2 title fights intrigues you more? And if you're feeling a little froggy, tell us who wins. Farah, we're all ears.
I think I'm going to go with Usman Nurmagomedov just because of all the attention that comes from being part of either the Nurmagomedov family or the Nurmagomedov camp. He's undefeated. I know some people have been critical about him potentially not deserving the title fight. I know their camp is probably going to be like, well, no one wants to fight us and all that. We kind of hear the similar story with all of them, right? With Umar, with Islam when he was on the rise, talking about how they have trouble getting fights, but at the same time, people feel like they're being fast-tracked a little bit too much. Islam was facing that himself. But I think the lure of him being undefeated coming out of that camp, all the attention that comes from that. And the thing is, I think it's good for those fighters in the camp to kind of form their own individual identity. I think right now they're always linked to Khabib, and I understand why. But with Islam, it's like we got to see some of his striking. He knocked down Oliveira, he submitted him, and now all of a sudden we're talking more about Islam individually than maybe we would if we're comparing them. So I think it's a good opportunity for Usman Nurmagomedov as well to come out of his shell. I know he's not as outspoken perhaps as the other ones, but it will be a good opportunity for to fight, not only to win the title, but against a notable Bellator veteran, a notable Bellator name in Patricky Frady. And at the same time, if he becomes champion, now he's going to have to fight all the top lightweights in the promotion. No one's going to really complain about matchmaking and stuff like that. So just the intrigue of him being undefeated, him being part of Khabib's camp, and just getting a chance to see him come into his own and kind of put those comparisons to the side. I think a title fight will give him the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, and here's some odds for you guys. Both champions are underdogs. Corey Anderson's minus 225, and Nemkov is plus 175, and then Usman Nurmagomedov is minus 400, and Patricky Pitbull comes back at plus 300. So, a little bit to think about. And Goes, your next year, which one intrigues you more?
I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to go Nemkov and Anderson. I think the nickname of overtime is fitting here because this Grand Prix is definitely in overtime. We need this to be over already, guys. It's almost 2023. I mean, come on. I know it's an unfortunate situation here. This happens with Grand Prix. I love Grand Prix, and I won't complain about them. But every once in a while, you're going to have these hiccups, and this is what we have to deal with. But unfortunately, the Grand Prix lost a little bit of momentum, right, because of all this situation. Doesn't mean you need to get away from him, Scott Coker. We love him, okay? Don't get away from him. But it did lose a little bit of momentum. So I think they're going to be happy because I think at the end of the day, this fight will be entertaining. I think it'll be a fun fight. But yeah, I'll be glad when this one's over. I know Corey Anderson and Nemkov will be as well because they've been in camp for God knows how long, how many holidays they've had to skip meals and all that. So once this is all over, man, I'll be happy. But I think it's going to be Corey Anderson that gets his hand raised.
Dude, Corey was already spending that bag and was on his way to Hawaii before the madness happened. All right, Mike Bond, break the tie here. Which one are you most intrigued by?
Man, it's kind of a tough choice because I'm not overly thrilled by either of these matchups, honestly, if I'm being sincere here, just because we already saw Corey Anderson and Vadim Nemkov. We knew how that was going before, the odd end there. And I expect it to go the same. I mean, I don't know if Vadim Nemkov has the ability or the time to be able to overcome the deficiency with the grappling there that Corey Anderson has over him. So I don't know if he's going to be able to turn that around in the second fight. I think maybe if you're talking about like what am I most excited for, it would probably just be Usman Nurmagomedov, the fighter, because I want to see how good this guy really is. I think a lot of people would agree he didn't exactly earn this title shot. There's some other guys out there in this division that probably deserved it before him, but Bellator put him in there because of the name, because what he could potentially be. And I think, Patricky Freire, I think people maybe have a little bit of a, mixed relationship as far as him being the champion too. He gets a vacant title win against Peter Queally, who I think was coming off like a loss, and his brother vacates the belt. So the whole thing just feels kind of weird. We're sitting here with, 2 championship bouts where people aren't like, these people feel like dominant champions, great champions, all that kind of stuff, clear-cut champions. So the whole thing is just kind of strange. I do think it's a good card for Bellator overall. I think what's going to come like after this, these fighters who win, whoever it may be going forward, are going to be some interesting storylines attached to them. But I do think we're kind of looking at the odds, as you mentioned there off the top, George, of how these challengers are favored. I think we're going to see that come through. And I think it's kind of almost just like a formality event at this point to get to the next thing.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough. You broke it down nicely. Shout out to Dan Tom, our colleague. He's in the chat. He's in the house. Got to protect my neck there. All right, guys. You know what? We have wonderful moments, right? UFC 281 was just a spectacular card, but obviously covering the sport, there's also some very, very sad moments that we experienced, and it was pretty sad yesterday. As we were recapping the events and all the wonderful content on MMA Junkie, and then we came across finding out about the unfortunate passing about Anthony Rumble Johnson, the former UFC, Bellator, and WSOF hard-hitting multiweight. That's right. He started as a welterweight in the UFC. He even fought at heavyweight at WSOF. We knew he was ill for some time. We just didn't know the details, what was exactly happening. And so we didn't know exactly, what his health was like. But man, that one hurt. That one really, really hurt. And you could just tell by the way people reacted on social media. I want to know, what are your thoughts on the passing of Anthony Rumble Johnson? I'm sure you all have a memory of Rumble. Tell us what you're thinking, man.
Oh, man, he's always going to have a soft spot in my heart, dude. That guy's been on MMA Junkie Radio so many times throughout his career, and he always gave us really good interviews. He would answer all the difficult questions. He would sit there with us for 2 hours. But my favorite memory of him, honestly, was we had a little tradition where every time when he won a fight, he would come in studio and he would do a shot. And we did not know this, but Anthony doesn't drink. So we didn't even find this out until I think the third shot or something, right, George? Where we ran into him 7 hours later at a party. And he was still wobbly. He's like, "What did you give me?" And we just all started laughing. But he was just, for being such a big, scary guy, he had a really big heart, man. And fighting wise, this happens very rarely in sports when you look back. But I feel like 40 years from now, when you see his highlights, they're still going to look scary. whoever the champion is at that time, you're still going to go, that guy would probably knock him out. That doesn't really happen. You know, when you go back and look at old quarterbacks or something, you say, well, they probably wouldn't be able to perform with the defenses of today or whatever. Anthony Johnson will be scary 100 years from now. Great fighter, great guy. I'm going to miss you, bud.
Yeah, for sure. Mike, how about you? You covered AJ for, pretty much all of his career as well.
Yeah, I remember even when I was just like a fan, like him coming into the UFC and getting those scary knockouts of like Chad Reinier and just like super quick ones very early in his career in the UFC as a welterweight. And you're just like, man, this guy's going to be such an absolute force in there. And, it wasn't always perfect for him. He had some deficiencies in his fight game. And obviously, the weight cutting stuff was a big narrative in his career. And, also, too, the fact of when he did retire after that title fight loss to Daniel Cormier the second time, I think he was one of the few fighters that kind of had the self-awareness to know that, my time is kind of over. This isn't what I want to be doing. And he didn't just keep pushing forward for like the paycheck and all that stuff. And I know he ultimately did come back for the one fight in Bellator, which would obviously be his final fight. And that's kind of one of my memories that stands out from him, because I had the chance to be in Florida at, then Sanford MMA, now Killcliff. And I interviewed him like a month before. At this time, he was supposed to fight Yoel Romero still. Obviously, that got changed very close to the fight. He fought Jose Augusto, but he seemed to just be in such a good place. And this was only like 17 months ago at this point. He was in incredibly good shape. His spirits were so high. He was so happy to be back, so happy to get a fight like Yoel Romero, who like the fans were just off the wall. Remember how excited we were for that thing? We were just like, this is going to be amazing. Probably one of the most anticipated Bellator fights they've ever put together. And obviously we didn't get it, but yeah, I just remember him being, in such good shape. He's like, take photos of me in this physique. Cause I remember I'd see him, not that long ago before that at like BKFC, and he looked incredibly out of shape, right? Like he looked like he had blown up to twice his size. And we were like, what happened to Anthony Johnson? He's loving life in his retirement, but he was able to get back to, being in a very good condition. And it's just kind of shocking to see that was only like 17 months ago, how poorly his health kind of deteriorated over this time. And, I talked to Scott Coker back in January about him, just wondering what the latest was. And he seemed to give a pretty grim update, saying that fighting does not need to be his priority. He needs to focus on health, because there's so much else to life at this point beyond competition. And, I guess that should have been foreshadowing on how serious his situation was to this point. And to get that news, despite knowing that he was obviously unwell to a degree, I believe our colleague Danny Segura kind of said in the Slack chat last night that he had seen him at like a BKFC event recently, and he was looking somewhat unwell. And as you kind of hear from other people around him, that seemed to be a similar case in recent weeks and months. And for it to just happen this way, kind of come out via, a few fighters tweeting about it, and that snowballs and gets confirmed. It's just really sad, man. A loss for the community for sure. And obviously, definitely one of the all-time great knockout artists in the history of the sport. What he did to Glover Teixeira, what he did to so many other guys was just remarkable in there. There probably won't be a few people who kind of have that one-touch power like he did. So he will absolutely be missed.
For sure. Steffi in the chat saying the good go young. Joker Boom says, even though he never met him, he knows he's going to miss him. Fada, share your thoughts on the passing of Anthony Rumble Johnson.
Yeah, very unfortunate. Of course, you kind of shows you never know what people are really going through. Like we knew he was ill, but it was a while where we didn't really get an update on him. And then just to, like Mike said, for us to hear on Twitter, it's always a shock. I mean, we lost Elias Theodoro shortly before that, and now Rumble Johnson. It's just super sad, and especially that he looked like he was ready to come back. He had that knockout over Jose Augusto in the quarterfinals of the Grand Prix, and it just looked like things were hopefully going to get back on track for him, but unfortunately they didn't. But I mean, he's had so many memorable moments throughout his career. If I just look at his fight career, I think of the fight against Alexander Gustafsson, that knockout over Gus. Gus was coming off of that lost to John Jones, a fight that a lot of people felt like he won. He rebounded with a finish of Jimmy Manuel, and then Anthony Johnson just goes to Sweden and silences the crowd with a quick knockout. Just the power he had, and was similar to what I was talking about Alex Pereira, how Alex Pereira had 25 minutes to show that power off. So does Rumble Johnson. He had Daniel Cormier on skates. Whoever he fought, you knew that you would always give him a chance just because of how powerful he was, and that one-punch knockout power, and the knockout that Mike talked about against Glover Teixeira. Just so many incredible moments throughout his career and just what could have been. So it looked like he was looking for kind of like a second chapter at Bellator to kind of get back on track in terms of his career. So just very unfortunate the way everything went down. And of course, he'll be missed. He's going to have highlights that are going to be playing on for 100 years to come.
Yeah. One of the scariest times that Dana White ever did one of those face-offs was because Rumble and John Jones had prepackaged, I guess, a little bit of a scuffle, but I'm sure a lot of it had to do with just that one punch power that Anthony has and having to get in between him and somebody else. That's a scary moment. My moment for me is I was at the Nogueira fight, the Little Nog fight, and vicious KO. And I've seen a lot of these events where afterwards everybody goes back to the fighter hotel and people will commiserate, be together, and a lot of fighters that lose will also show up and still thank fans or just hang out. Some that have even been knocked out. So there's different degrees of being knocked out. But I remember Nogueira walking through the doors, as they opened up there in the hotel at San Jose, and he was still being helped hours later by two people. Looked like he had an ice pack on his head. It honestly just looked like a car had just hit him outside the parking lot. But that's just the type of power that AJ packed. It was some serious power. Then I remember one time we were interviewing him, I don't remember exactly how it went down, but I probably asked one of my dumb questions, you gonna party after that big win or something like that? And he told me, of course, man, what do I look like, Boo Boo the Fool? Oh, I was using that one for the next couple of months. That cracked me up, Boo Boo the Fool. But yeah, AJ was just like Go said, very personable, so violent. Obviously, he could get down and crack. But yeah, once it was all over and you just wanted to have a chat, you could have a chat, and talk about anything. He really loved football. He loved Georgia football. And this would be some of the years that he could really be flexing, because Georgia football is obviously on top with their national championship, their #1 ranking. You and I saw him after the Billy Idol concert at the Palms, and he was in pretty good spirits, still holding some pretty good shape. But like I say, yeah, just great athlete, even better human being, and he's definitely going to be missed. From the MMA Junkie family, we extend our condolences to the Johnson family, their friends, teammates, everybody. A lot of people loved Rumble. He's definitely going to be missed. Let's move on here also to another sad moment, not to the degree, obviously, of Anthony Johnson, but Frankie Edgar. First of all, the end of a great MMA career, UFC career. I mean, you never know. He might come back, but he really sounds like a man of his word. And, of course, it did not go well for Frankie Edgar. Chris Gutierrez delivered a knockout knee, had him pretty much flattened there in the octagon at UFC 281. Mike, you saw it, you felt it the best. We're going to start with you first here. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, man, yikes, right? Like, obviously, I think we knew it was a possibility. Frankie Edgar could lose this fight and lose it by knockout, by stoppage, but I just didn't see it like that, right? Like, I didn't see it being him absolutely stretched out, or maybe didn't want to see it like that, right? It was rough. I mean, it was about as bad as it could get in Madison Square Garden. He's got his kids there watching him fight live for the first time. I mean, what a traumatic moment for them too, right? Like, it's just the way, the sport happens to be a lot of times. And I did listen back to part of that fight last night, rewatching a bit of the broadcast. I didn't get to see the whole thing, but I saw that portion of it. And Daniel Cormier, going on about this is the way it needs to be. All the legends go out like this on their back. And it's like, yeah, a lot of them do, but it doesn't have to be this way, right? Like, they could have gone a different direction with this. We all wanted to see the Dominic Cruz fight, him fight someone who was kind of in that similar career place right now, to send them off that way. I mean, you're not going to send Frankie Edgar, of all people, off with like a matchup that's at least somewhat stylistically friendly, somewhat on his level, then what are we even really doing here, right? Like, I think he absolutely deserves that. And obviously he accepted the fight, so they get some of the onus on that, but it's just not what we want to see. Obviously, this is the guy who's one of the biggest legends in the sport's history, most fight time in UFC history, reached 30 fights, done so many things. So to see him go out like that was sad, but obviously, he is still one of the all-time greats. This takes nothing away. The fact that he's been knocked out quite a few times in recent years, I don't think it takes away from the fact that he showed the path to being an undersized fighter who can go in there and compete at the higher weight classes without having to cut massive amount of weights. I mean, his lightweight run, what he did there is the stuff of legends. It might not ever be repeated again. So it was a sad farewell for Frankie Edgar, but he is no doubt going to be in the UFC Hall of Fame probably sooner than later. And I hope he's able to at least stomach this result and show that he should not be competing with these type of guys on this level anymore, and he can go off and enjoy the next portion of his life, because even if he wants to stay involved in fighting, he can do it in a different way as a cornerman, trainer, training partner, whatever the case may be, because he has so much to give back.
Maybe even a comedian too. We saw him perform here, right? Goes at the Strat. He did pretty good. All right, Fada, how about you? Frankie Edgar, his career, his impact. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with Mike. I didn't like that matchup at all for him. I just felt like he deserved a lot better. And that's no disrespect to Gutierrez. It's almost like because he's so dangerous. And he was coming off of a great knockout himself, so it was almost like he had momentum, and good for him that he gets to put a name like Frankie Edgar on his resume. But Frankie fighting, well, he's from Jersey, but very close to his home state, against a guy like Gutierrez, I felt like he deserved like a bigger name and a better stylistic matchup where at least I mean, I don't know if Rocco's going to return again, but at least Rocco got to have some sort of like great moment where people were praising him for his heart and stuff like that. For Edgar to go out like that, you could see how disappointed he looked. But at the end of the day, it doesn't take away from Frankie Edgar's incredible career. He holds a lot of record. He's fought so many great guys. A lot like a notable moment for me that will stick out. That celebration exactly right there when he knocked out Chad Mendes. I was very surprised with that. That was probably the most like surprised I was in a recent memory of an outcome of the fight. Not that I didn't think he could win that fight, but to knock out Chad Mendes in the first round. Mendes had just had that amazing rematch with Jose Aldo. He gave Conor McGregor a super tough fight. And I guess Frankie Edgar isn't known for his one-punch knockout power. So for him to go out and do that to a very good Chad Mendes, a Chad Mendes that gave everybody, even gave Volkanovski a super tough fight, for him to do that, I think that was one of his biggest wins of his career. Of course, not to talk about the BJ Penn and him winning the lightweight title, but just to show that constantly, time and time again, this guy could compete with the best. Of course, Father Time gets the best out of everybody. He wasn't going to compete forever, right? But it's just unfortunate that his recent losses all came in that fashion. I would have liked a better moment for him at MSG, but of course, this sport is very unforgiving.
Yeah, definitely. Legend. Great word. Perfect for him. Great stuff from Mike and Fada. I also agree with the Hall of Fame. It's coming for him. How about you, Goes? Clean it up. What's on your mind here?
Well, I mean, legend's a perfect word, man. This guy, I think what his legacy is going to be about is his inspiration. He inspired a lot of fans, but he also inspired a lot of fighters. And I don't know, outside of Anderson Silva, personally, that I've seen fighters geek out over another fighter. I always see them come up to Frankie Edgar, ask for a picture, pick his brain, because this is a dude that, like, at the end of the day, when you look at his record, you're going to see a lot of losses on there. But that doesn't really define the situation that he was in. Like, if you look at guys like Muhammad Ali, Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, they had losses too. And I think that's what makes a great fighter. Was the reason those losses are there is because he continuously challenged himself, right? He wasn't complacent. He didn't pick easy fights, and he did it across multiple divisions, which is so difficult, which even at the end here, guys, he still looked like the smaller guy. And this was the smallest division that he's picked. So it was always an uphill battle, but you could never tell by looking at his face or his performances. That guy gave you an honest camp all the time. And I hope this is it for him. I know he teased a little bit of boxing or whatever. Stay away from that, champ. Just, you had a great run in MMA, and I'm thankful that I got to see him fight live.
Yeah, the
Just
Gray
last
Maynard
thing,
fight.
George, to jump in. Just if you want to see what kind of fellow fighters think of Frankie Edgar, go watch like the media day interviews from UFC 281. Jose Youngs from MMA Fighting asked every fighter their thoughts on Frankie Edgar's retirement, just the way they speak about him and what they think about him. It kind of says it all. And someone in the chat also mentioned the Gray Maynard fights. We can't go without saying for that. So obviously those were some of the all-time great battles for them. And just, I guess, last thing on a personal note, it was pretty cool. Like, the first event I ever attended as a fan was UFC 67, where he made his debut against Tyson Griffin in the fight of the night. And then all those years later to be covering, his retirement fight from Press Row was kind of a crazy kind of story. So yeah, obviously one of the all-time greats.
17 years in MMA, 15 of those in the UFC, fought across the 3 divisions, and a defending and a world champion, man. Shout out to you, Frankie Edgar, on a great career. And of course, we'll never forget the sprints to the octagon. And I got to sprint on out of here because we're up against the clock. Great job by the panel. As always, cold coffee behind the scenes, the team, the chatters, you guys came strong. And of course, we're going to do this every week like we do, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Here on Mondays, it's SBC Live, Spinning Back Clique. Tell your friends about it. We'll see you here next week. Until then, go out and be a champion.